Captain Jake Morrison stared at the massive alien ship through the viewport of the UES horizon, and knew his crew was in serious trouble. The vessel before them was 3 times larger than any human ship ever built and covered in strange glowing symbols that hurt to look at directly. Jake had been exploring space for 15 years but had never seen anything like this before. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the communication panel, but before he could speak, the alien ship fired some kind of energy beam that wrapped around the horizon like invisible chains. The human ship's engines died instantly, and Jake felt his stomach drop as artificial gravity flickered and failed for several seconds. Lieutenant Amy Foster at the navigation station looked up with wide eyes and reported that all their systems were being controlled by the alien vessel. Jake ordered his crew to remain calm, but inside he felt anything but calm himself. 200 human lives depended on his decisions in the next few minutes, and he had no idea what these aliens wanted, or even, if they could be reasoned with at all, that the alien ship pulled the horizon into what looked like a massive cargo bay filled with other captured vessels from species Jake had never imagined could exist. Some ships looked like living creatures with organic hulls, while others appeared to be made from crystalline materials that sparkled in the dim light. Jake realized with growing horror that humanity had just encountered something far beyond their understanding, and they were completely helpless against it. Tall figures in dark armor bordered the horizon within minutes, and Jake got his first close look at the beings who had captured them. The soldiers stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished stone. Their leader stepped forward and spoke in perfect English, which surprised Jake more than anything else so far. The alien explained that they were representatives of the Zephyrian Empire and that Jake's species would now face judgment from the High Council. Jake and his senior officers were taken from their ship and marched through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls showed images of thousands of different worlds, and Jake began to understand that these aliens had conquered many civilizations before encountering humanity. The Horizon's captain tried to maintain his dignity as they walked, but felt increasingly small and insignificant compared to the massive structures around them. The High Council chamber was larger than any building Jake had ever seen on Earth, with a domed ceiling that showed real-time images of space battles and conquered worlds. 12 different alien species sat in judgment, and Jake could feel their eyes studying him like he was some kind of interesting insect. Admiral Vexter of the Krillians spoke first, and his voice boomed through the chamber as he described humanity as another weak species ready for conquest. The telepathic Vorthok named Zemoth attempted to read Jake's mind but pulled back quickly. With what looked like confusion on his strange triangular face, the alien muttered something about human thoughts being chaotic and filled with incomprehensible emotions that made no logical sense. Other council members nodded in agreement, and Jake realized these beings saw humanity as mentally inferior as well as physically weak. Commander Hirath of the Silvani presented a detailed analysis of human technology and dismissed it as primitive compared to Zephyrian standards. She explained that humans had barely mastered space travel while the Empire had been conquering star systems for thousands of years. The other aliens seemed bored by the discussion, as if humanity was hardly worth their time and attention. The Council's decision came swiftly and without debate. Earth would receive an ultimatum demanding immediate and complete surrender within 24 hours or face total destruction. Admiral Vextar explained that 847 other species had already submitted to Zephyrian rule, and humanity would simply become number 848 on their list of conquered worlds. Jake listened to the terms of surrender and felt anger building in his chest. Despite their hopeless situation, the aliens wanted humanity to disarm completely, surrender all technology, and accept permanent slavery under Zephyrian rule. Any resistance would result in the complete destruction of Earth and every human colony in space. The Council clearly expected immediate acceptance of these terms, based on their previous experience with other species. When Admiral Vextar finished speaking, the chamber fell silent and all eyes turned to Jake for humanity's response. The captain looked around at the 12 alien species who had never known defeat and saw nothing but arrogance and certainty in their faces. They had no doubt that humans would surrender, just like everyone else had done when faced with overwhelming force. Jake took a deep breath and stood as straight as he could manage while looking directly at Admiral Vexter. His voice was steady and clear when he spoke the words that would change everything. He told the Council that humanity would need time to discuss their ultimatum with Earth's leaders before giving any answer. The aliens looked genuinely surprised by this response, as if no one had ever asked for time to consider surrender before. Admiral Vexstar granted the requested time with obvious amusement, and Jake could hear several council members laughing quietly among themselves. They clearly believed that 24 hours would be more than enough time for humans to realize the hopelessness of their situation and accept defeat. Jake was escorted back to a holding cell, knowing that he had just delivered humanity's first message to a hostile galaxy and wondering if it would also be their last. The message from Captain Jake Morrison reached Earth exactly 18 hours before the Zephyrian deadline, and the response was nothing like what the monitoring alien fleet expected to see. President Linda Carter stood before the emergency session of the United Nations and delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. She told the assembled leaders that humanity had always faced impossible odds throughout their history and had never once chosen surrender over freedom. Within 6 hours of receiving the ultimatum, every major nation on Earth had committed their entire military and industrial capacity to what everyone knew would be humanity's final war. The Zephyrians watched from their ships in confusion as ancient enemies suddenly became closest allies. Countries that had been preparing for war against each other immediately began sharing technology and resources as if their previous conflicts had never existed at all. Commander Hirath of the Salvani monitored human communications and reported increasingly strange behavior patterns to Admiral Vexstar. Humans were dismantling their civilian infrastructure and converting everything to military production at a speed that defied logical explanation. Factories that had been producing automobiles and consumer goods were retooled to manufacture weapons and spacecraft within hours rather than the months such conversions should require. The most puzzling aspect of human behavior was their apparent enthusiasm for a war they could not possibly win. Instead of panic or despair, the Zephyrians detected something in human communications that their translation systems labeled as excitement mixed with grim determination. Soldiers from around the world were volunteering for missions that offered no chance of survival, and humans seemed to consider this normal behavior rather than evidence of mental instability. General Ryan Clark at NORAD coordinated Earth's defense preparations, and his calm, professional demeanor impressed even the alien observers who had expected chaos and confusion. Clark treated the coming battle against vastly superior forces as simply another military problem to be solved through careful planning and resource management. The Zephyrians had never encountered a species that maintained such discipline when facing certain extinction. The underground shelter construction that began immediately after the ultimatum's arrival demonstrated human capabilities that the aliens had completely failed to detect during their initial assessment. Massive excavation projects that should have taken years were completed in days as human workers labored around the clock with determination that bordered on obsession. Entire cities disappeared underground while surface installations were converted into defensive positions. Children were evacuated to the underground facilities with an efficiency that suggested humans had been planning for this exact scenario for decades. The Zephyrians realized that human military preparation went far beyond what their intelligence gathering had revealed. Earth's population had been mentally and logistically ready for total war in ways that made no sense for a species that had never encountered hostile aliens before. Admiral Vexstar reviewed the tactical assessments and confirmed that human resistance would be crushed within hours of the first attack. The Empire's computer simulations showed complete human defeat with minimal Zephyrian losses, regardless of how desperately the humans fought. Every mathematical model supported the same conclusion, and Vexstar began to feel impatient with the humans for prolonging their inevitable surrender. When the 24-hour deadline expired, Admiral Vexstar expected to receive humanity's formal submission along with detailed surrender terms. Instead, his communications officer reported an incoming transmission from General Clark at NORAD that contained only 3 words in response to the ultimatum. The human general looked directly into the camera and said, "Come and take it," with the kind of cold smile that warriors throughout history had worn when they intended to make their enemies pay dearly for victory. The Zephyrian High Council was genuinely puzzled by this response and ordered their military analysts to explain human behavior patterns. No species in their extensive database had ever rejected surrender when faced with overwhelming technological superiority. The concept of choosing certain death over submission was so alien to Zephyrian thinking that their computers could not process it as a rational decision. Commander Hirath attempted to provide context by explaining that humans seemed to value abstract concepts like freedom and honor more highly than their own survival. This analysis was rejected by other council members as obviously impossible, since evolution would have eliminated any species that prioritized ideas over self. The Salvani commander insisted her observations were accurate but found herself unable to make her colleagues understand. The decision was made to demonstrate Zephyrian power through a limited strike that would surely bring humans to their senses. Admiral Vextar selected Earth's lunar colonies and orbital stations as targets since destroying them would show human helplessness without killing large numbers of people. The Empire had found that such demonstrations usually ended resistance immediately while leaving the conquered population intact for future use. The attack was executed with typical Zephyrian precision, and the human installations were destroyed exactly as planned. Admiral Vextar then waited for the surrender transmission that logic demanded would follow such an overwhelming display of power. Instead, his sensors detected thousands of small human vessels launching from Earth and heading directly toward the Zephyrian fleet positions. The approaching human ships were clearly civilian vessels that had been hastily converted for military use. Their weapons were primitive and their armor was virtually non-existent compared to Zephyrian standards. Many of the ships appeared to be nothing more than cargo haulers or mining craft with missile launchers welded to their hulls. Admiral Vex could not understand why humans would send such pathetic vessels against his mighty fleet. The human ships continued their approach, despite repeated warnings, and Admiral Vextar realized with growing amazement that the humans intended to actually fight rather than surrender. The concept was so foreign to Zephyrian experience that many alien officers suggested the humans might be suffering from some form of mass mental illness that prevented them from recognizing reality. Admiral Vextar ordered his fleet to prepare for combat, while privately wondering if humanity might be the first species in galactic history that was literally too stupid to surrender when faced with impossible odds. The idea that humans might choose death over submission remained incomprehensible to minds that had evolved to value survival above all other considerations, including dignity and freedom. The first wave of human ships approached the Zephyrian fleet in a formation that made no tactical sense according to any military doctrine in the Empire's vast database. Lieutenant Commander Kelly Adams led her squadron of converted mining vessels against Zephyrian cruisers that outgunned her ships by factors of 10 to 1. The alien tactical computers predicted complete human annihilation within minutes, and Admiral Vextar prepared to watch the brief and pointless battle. Kelly's ships opened fire at maximum range with weapons that should have been completely ineffective against Zephyrian shields and armor. The primitive human missiles and energy beams struck the alien vessels and caused minimal damage exactly as predicted. Admiral Vextar ordered his fleet to return fire and expected to end the engagement with a single coordinated volley that would vaporize every human ship. Simultaneously, the Zephyrian weapons fired with devastating accuracy, but something unexpected happened in the moments before the human ships were destroyed. Kelly Adams aimed her damaged mining vessel directly at a Zephyrian cruiser and activated her ship's industrial cutting laser at point-blank range. The beam was designed for asteroid mining, not combat, but it burned through the cruiser's shield generators at close range and caused a cascade failure that left the massive alien ship defenseless. Two other human captains followed Kelly's example and rammed their ships into Zephyrian vessels before the aliens could adjust their tactics. The mining ships were destroyed instantly, but their improvised weapons and desperate tactics managed to damage or disable 3 enemy cruisers. Admiral Vextar stared at his tactical display in confusion as he realized that humans had just inflicted casualties on his fleet using nothing but converted civilian vessels. The second wave of human ships attacked using completely different tactics that caught the Zephyrians off guard again. Colonel Nathan Price led a group of cargo haulers that had been loaded with improvised explosive devices instead of their usual freight. The ships scattered in multiple directions and forced the aliens to divide their fire while human vessels hid behind debris from the first engagement. Colonel Price's ships used the wreckage of destroyed human vessels as cover and launched surprise attacks from angles the Zephyrians had not anticipated. The cargo haulers were not built for combat maneuvering, but their human crews pushed the vessels far beyond safe operational limits to achieve positioning that alien computers calculated as impossible. Several Zephyrian ships took damage from attacks they never saw coming. The most shocking moment came when Captain Lisa Thompson deliberately overloaded her ship's reactor and rammed the resulting explosion into a Zephyrian command vessel. The alien shields were designed to stop external attacks but had no defense against a ship that turned itself into a massive bomb at close range. The command ship was destroyed along with Thompson's vessel, and the Zephyrian formation lost coordination for several critical minutes. Admiral Vextar demanded explanations from his tactical officers but found that none of them could understand human behavior patterns. The Empire's military doctrine was based on preserving valuable ships and experienced crews while achieving victory through superior technology and firepower. Humans seemed to view their own lives and equipment as expendable resources to be traded for any possible advantage against their enemies. The Zephyrian computers could not process tactical decisions that involved deliberate self-destruction as a legitimate military strategy. Every simulation showed that suicide attacks were inefficient and wasteful compared to conventional warfare. The idea that humans would consider dying for their cause to be honorable rather than tragic was completely outside alien understanding. Intelligence reports from captured human prisoners revealed disturbing information about human psychology that explained their inexplicable behavior. Humans had concepts like heroism and sacrifice that made death in battle desirable rather than something to be avoided. The aliens learned that human cultures actually celebrated warriors who died fighting against impossible odds. Commander Ho attempted to explain human behavior to the High Council but found that her colleagues refused to accept her analysis. The Salvani insisted that humans were behaving irrationally by any logical standard, and that such behavior would be bred out of any successful species within a few generations. The idea that seemingly suicidal tendencies could actually be advantageous in warfare was rejected as obviously impossible. The third wave of human attacks demonstrated even more incomprehensible tactics as human commanders began using their own weaknesses as weapons against the Zephyr. Captain Steve Parker led a group of damaged ships that pretended to be completely destroyed while actually retaining limited combat capability. The vessels drifted among genuine wreckage and waited for Zephyrian ships to approach close enough for point-blank attacks. Parker's ghost ships managed to destroy two Zephyrian vessels and damage several others before the aliens realized what was happening. The tactic worked because Zephyrian doctrine called for confirming kills on enemy vessels, but their crews never expected destroyed ships to suddenly return to life and resume fighting. Human ships that appeared completely disabled continued to pose threats until they were reduced to scattered atoms. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces began to show as alien crews started displaying stress responses when facing human opponents. Warriors who had conquered hundreds of worlds without ever experiencing serious resistance found themselves genuinely frightened of primitive human vessels that refused to follow any recognizable patterns of behavior. Admiral Vextar realized that his fleet had suffered more casualties in a single engagement against humans than in the previous 50 years of conquest combined. The Empire's standard tactics were proving ineffective against enemies who seemed to welcome death as eagerly as victory. Worse yet, the humans showed no signs of becoming discouraged despite their obvious technological disadvantages. The most disturbing discovery came when Zephyrian analysts reviewed recordings of human communications during the battle. Instead of despair or panic, the humans expressed satisfaction with their performance and eagerness to continue fighting. Pilots who had watched their comrades die in suicide attacks spoke of their fallen friends with pride rather than grief. Major Helen Foster coordinated the fourth wave of attacks using tactics that combined human unpredictability with captured Zephyrian equipment salvaged from disabled alien ships. Her forces demonstrated an ability that no other species had ever shown. By successfully operating alien technology within hours of encountering it for the first time, the humans learned to use Zephyrian weapons against their creators with devastating effectiveness. Admiral Vextar found himself requesting reinforcements from the High Council for what should have been a simple extermination mission. The request was met with skepticism since no previous conquest had required additional resources beyond the initial fleet deployment. Vextar struggled to explain how primitive humans had managed to inflict significant damage on technologically superior forces without appearing incompetent himself. 3 months into the war, something unprecedented happened that shook the Zephyrian Empire to its core. General Marcus Webb led a successful assault on a major alien supply depot using tactics that should have been impossible for primitive humans to execute. The attack demonstrated capabilities that the Empire's intelligence services had completely failed to detect during their initial assessment of human civilization. Webb's forces approached the heavily defended facility using a combination of captured alien stealth technology and human innovations that created hybrid systems more effective than either species had achieved alone. The supply depot's automated defenses were designed to stop conventional attacks, but had no programming to handle enemies who mixed familiar Zephyrian technology with completely unknown human modifications. The human assault teams bypassed alien security systems by using equipment that registered as friendly to Zephyrian sensors, while actually being controlled by human operators. Webb's soldiers had learned to operate complex alien technology within weeks of encountering it and were now using that knowledge to turn the Empire's own weapons against their creators with devastating effectiveness. Dr. Patricia Lane worked in underground laboratories that had been carved from solid rock beneath Earth's major cities, and her research teams were producing results that defied every known law about technological development. Lane scientists studied captured Zephyrian equipment and within days were manufacturing hybrid weapons that combined alien principles with human engineering approaches. The weapons produced in Lane's laboratories were crude by Zephyrian standards, but proved remarkably effective in actual combat situations. Human engineers seemed to understand that perfect technology was less important than technology that could be produced quickly and modified rapidly based on battlefield experience. The aliens watched in amazement as humans developed new weapons faster than the Empire could develop countermeasures. Captain Steve Parker commanded a new class of human warship that incorporated lessons learned from months of desperate fighting against superior forces. His vessels looked nothing like traditional spacecraft and featured innovations that alien engineers dismissed as impossible until they proved devastatingly effective in combat. Parker's ships used adaptive armor that changed configuration during battle and weapons systems that could be reconfigured for different targets within minutes. The psychological warfare aspect of human strategy became apparent when Parker's fleet began using ghost ship tactics on a massive scale. Entire squadrons of human vessels would appear to be destroyed only to reveal themselves as fully functional when Zephyrian forces approached to salvage the wrecks. The aliens found themselves unable to trust their own senses when dealing with human opponents. Major Helen Foster achieved the impossible when her boarding party successfully captured a Zephyrian battleship intact and brought it back to human-controlled space. The operation required precise coordination between multiple human units and demonstrated tactical sophistication that the Empire had never seen from supposedly primitive species. Foster's team had learned to fight effectively in alien environments, using captured equipment and improvised tactics. The captured battleship provided human scientists with their first opportunity to study advanced Zephyrian technology in detail, and the results exceeded every expectation. Dr. Lane's research teams reverse-engineered alien systems and began producing human versions that incorporated improvements the original designers had never considered. The hybrid technology was often unreliable but showed capabilities that surprised even its creators. Human forces began fielding weapons that used Zephyrian power sources with human targeting systems, and the combination proved more effective than either component alone. The aliens discovered that human creativity extended far beyond simple adaptation and included genuine innovation that produced entirely new approaches to familiar problems. Humans were not just copying alien technology, but improving it in ways the Empire had never imagined possible. The Zephyrian High Council received reports of human technological progress that seemed to contradict everything they understood about species development. Civilizations were supposed to advance slowly over thousands of years, but humans appeared to be leaping forward by centuries within months. The concept of rapid technological evolution during warfare was completely outside alien experience. Commander Hyrath presented analysis showing that human development was accelerating rather than slowing despite the pressures of total war. The Sylvani explained that most species became more conservative when facing extinction, but humans seemed to become more innovative and willing to take risks. The Council rejected her findings as obviously impossible since evolution favored caution over recklessness. The turning point came when human forces launched their first major offensive operation using entirely hybrid technology that combined the best aspects of both civilizations. Admiral Kate Robinson commanded a fleet of vessels that looked alien but behaved in ways that no Zephyrian computer could predict or counter effectively. Robinson's ships used human tactics with alien weapons and achieved results that neither species could have accomplished alone. The Battle of Wolf 359 demonstrated how completely the war had changed since its beginning. Robinson's fleet engaged the Zephyrian forces using formations and tactics that evolved continuously throughout the engagement. Human ships adapted their strategies in real time based on enemy responses and showed a flexibility that the Empire's rigid military doctrine could not match. Zephyrian forces found themselves fighting an enemy that had become technologically equivalent while retaining all the unpredictability and adaptability that had made humans dangerous from the beginning. The aliens realized with growing horror that they had created their own worst nightmare by forcing humanity to evolve rapidly under the pressure of total war. The most disturbing aspect of human development was their ability to learn from every encounter and incorporate those lessons into new weapons and tactics within days rather than years. Human commanders like Robinson studied Zephyrian battle recordings and developed countermeasures faster than alien engineers could create new offensive systems. The Empire's technological advantage was disappearing as humans proved capable of matching alien innovation while maintaining superior adaptability. General Webb's successful defense of the Proxima Centauri system marked the first time in galactic history that a supposedly primitive species had defeated the Zephyrian Empire. In open battle, Webb's forces used tactics that combined human unpredictability with captured alien technology to achieve a victory that military analysts had calculated as impossible just months earlier. The defeat at Proxima Centauri sent shockwaves throughout. The Empire as member species began to question whether the war could actually be won. For the first time in millennia, the Zephyrian military faced the possibility of defeat at the hands of enemies they had initially dismissed as barely sentient. The humans had not only survived the Empire's initial assault but had grown stronger and more dangerous with each passing day of warfare. The war entered its second year with the Zephyrian Empire facing something that had never happened in their thousands of years of conquest. The 12-species alliance that had seemed unbreakable began showing serious cracks as member civilizations questioned the wisdom of continuing a conflict that was supposed to have ended within days. Admiral Vextar found himself defending decisions to species representatives who had never experienced military defeat before. Commander Hirath presented her final analysis to the High Council, and the conclusions were more disturbing than anyone had imagined possible. The Silvani had studied human behavior patterns for over a year and determined that humans possessed a quality that no other known species had ever demonstrated. Instead of becoming weaker under pressure, humans actually grew stronger and more dangerous when faced with superior forces. The analysis explained why every previous Zephyrian conquest had followed predictable patterns, while the human war defied all expectations. Most species fought desperately at first, but gradually lost hope as the futility of resistance became apparent. Humans showed the opposite pattern and became more determined and effective as the war continued. Despite suffering enormous casualties and material losses, the Silvani were the first major species to break ranks when their leadership privately approached Colonel Ben Turner with a proposal for separate peace negotiations. The analytical minds that had made them valuable members of the Empire also made them the first to recognize that the war had become unwinnable. Their secret meetings with human representatives sent panic through the other member species. Turner's diplomatic team discovered that the Zephyrian alliance was far more fragile than it appeared, and that several species were already considering withdrawal from the conflict. The humans began exploiting these divisions by offering generous terms to any species willing to abandon the Empire. The strategy worked because many aliens had joined the alliance for protection rather than conquest. The Vorthok telepaths were the second species to privately contact human negotiators after their attempts to read human minds revealed something that terrified them beyond description. The telepathic species had encountered thoughts and emotions that were completely alien to their understanding. Human minds contained concepts of sacrifice and determination that the Vorthok found genuinely frightening. Admiral Kate Robinson commanded the first human fleet capable of challenging Zephyrian forces on equal terms, and her ships incorporated 2 years of hard-won experience fighting against superior technology. Robinson's vessels combined human adaptability with captured alien systems to create warships that were both familiar and revolutionary. The hybrid technology gave humans capabilities that neither species could have achieved alone. The decisive engagement at Wolf 359 demonstrated how completely the balance of power had shifted since the war's beginning. Robinson's fleet used tactics that evolved continuously during the battle, and showed a flexibility that rigid Zephyrian doctrine could not match. Human ships adapted their strategies in real time while alien forces followed predetermined battle plans that became predictable. The Krillian military commanders who had initially dismissed humans as weaklings found themselves unable to defeat enemies who refused to follow conventional military logic. The warrior species that had conquered hundreds of worlds discovered that their traditional advantages meant nothing against opponents who turned every weakness into a weapon and treated defeat as merely another form of victory. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces became critical as alien crews began showing signs of genuine fear when facing human opponents. Warriors who had never known defeat started requesting transfers away from the human front, and morale throughout the Empire's military began to collapse. The very mention of human tactics was enough to cause panic among previously elite units. The internal conflicts within the Alliance intensified when the Crystalline Collective accused the Krillians of incompetent leadership, while the Vorthark blamed the Selvaani for providing faulty intelligence about human capabilities. Species that had cooperated for millennia began arguing about responsibility for the disaster, and several members threatened to withdraw their forces entirely. Colonel Turner's diplomatic efforts succeeded in negotiating secret agreements for species who agreed to withdraw from the Alliance in exchange for human guarantees of protection from Zephyrian retaliation. The deals were kept secret, but their effects became apparent when alien fleets began suffering from mysterious equipment failures and intelligence leaks that favored human forces. The Battle of Proxima Centauri marked the beginning of the end for the Zephyrian Empire when Admiral Robinson's forces achieved complete victory against what should have been overwhelmingly superior alien forces. The engagement demonstrated that humans had not only achieved technological parity but had surpassed their enemies in tactical innovation and strategic thinking. Admiral Vexter realized with growing horror that the Empire had created exactly the kind of enemy they were least equipped to fight. The Zephyrians had evolved to defeat conventional opponents using superior technology and overwhelming force, but had no answer for enemies who grew stronger through adversity and treated impossible odds as merely another challenge to overcome. Most damaging discovery came when intelligence reports revealed that humans were actively recruiting alien species to join their cause rather than simply seeking their neutrality. Human diplomats offered former Zephyrian subjects genuine partnership and equality instead of the subjugation they had experienced under Imperial rule. The contrast was striking enough to cause defections among previously loyal species. General Marcus Webb's successful invasion of 3 Zephyrian worlds demonstrated that humans had become capable of offensive operations on a galactic scale. Webb's forces used captured alien technology combined with human innovations to achieve victories that reversed centuries of Imperial expansion. The liberated worlds welcomed human forces as rescuers rather than conquerors. The final blow to Alliance unity came when the Aquatic Dominion publicly announced their withdrawal from the Empire and requested human protection from Zephyrian retaliation. The announcement triggered a cascade of similar declarations as species throughout the Alliance realized that continued resistance was futile and that humans offered better terms than the Empire ever had. Admiral Vextar found himself commanding a rapidly shrinking fleet as member species abandoned the Alliance and alien crews deserted rather than face human forces in battle. The mighty empire that had conquered nearly 1,000 worlds was collapsing not through military defeat but through the simple recognition that humans represented something entirely new in galactic civilization. The Zephyrian High Council met for what everyone knew would be their final session as representatives of a galactic empire. The 12 species that had once ruled hundreds of worlds now controlled barely a dozen systems and faced human fleets that grew stronger with each passing day. The impossible had happened, and the Empire faced complete defeat at the hands of primitive humans who had refused to surrender when any rational species would have accepted their fate. The war ended not with humanity's surrender, but with the complete collapse of the mighty Zephyrian Empire that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. Admiral Vextar sat in his command chair aboard the last Imperial battleship and watched human fleets surround his position with a mixture of amazement and grudging respect. The final battle at Proxima Centauri had demonstrated beyond doubt that the Empire's military superiority was a thing of the past. Captain Tony Martinez commanded the human flagship UES Defiance, and his communication to Admiral Vextar was respectful, rather than triumphant. The human officer offered terms that were more generous than anything the Empire had ever provided to defeated enemies. Vextar realized that humans had learned not just how to fight but how to win with honor intact. Commander Hyrith was brought aboard the Defiance as a prisoner, but found herself treated as an honored guest rather than a defeated enemy. The Selvani officer had spent 2 years studying human behavior and thought she understood their psychology, but discovered that human generosity in victory was as surprising as their tenacity in defeat. Martinez explained that humans valued former enemies who could become future allies. The final irony became clear as Hereth reviewed the complete intelligence files that humans willingly shared with their former enemies. Everything the Empire needed to understand human nature had been available from the beginning, but the aliens had dismissed the evidence because it contradicted their fundamental assumptions about how intelligent species should behave in the face of overwhelming force. Dr. Rachel Stone headed the newly formed Terran Alien Research Council and worked with former Zephyrian scientists to build something that had never existed in galactic history. The research facility brought together the best minds from dozens of species to solve problems through cooperation rather than conquest. Stone explained that humans valued diversity of thought as much as unity of purpose. The qualities that had made humans impossible to defeat in warfare proved equally valuable in peacetime, as human leaders demonstrated the same adaptability and innovation that had won the war. President Linda Carter addressed the newly formed Galactic Assembly and outlined humanity's vision for a truly cooperative civilization where strength came from unity rather than domination. Admiral Vexter was offered a position in the new Galactic Defense Force rather than imprisonment or execution, and found himself genuinely puzzled by human behavior patterns. The species that had defeated his empire in total war now wanted his expertise to help protect all civilizations from future threats. The concept of turning enemies into allies was as foreign to Zephyrian thinking as sacrifice had been. The most profound change came when former Imperial subjects began requesting human assistance in rebuilding their civilizations rather than simply accepting liberation. Species that had suffered under Zephyrian rule for centuries discovered that humans offered genuine partnership and equality. Instead of merely replacing one form of domination with another, Commander Hereth worked closely with human analysts to understand what the Empire had missed during their initial assessment of humanity. The answer was both simple and devastating in its implications. The Zephyrians had judged humans by the standards they applied to every other species without realizing that humans represented something genuinely new in galactic evolution. The Selvani analysis revealed that the Empire had measured human technology and found it primitive compared to their own advanced systems. They had measured human physical capabilities and found them inferior to stronger alien species. They had measured human civilization and found it fragmented compared to the unity of imperial rule. But they had never measured the qualities that actually mattered in warfare. Human adaptability had allowed them to learn and improve faster than any species in galactic history. Human creativity had enabled them to develop new solutions to problems that had stumped alien scientists for millennia. Human determination had given them the strength to continue fighting when any rational species would have surrendered to preserve their population. The most important quality that Empire had failed to recognize was humanity's refusal to accept defeat as final. Every other species the Zephyrians had encountered eventually reached a point where continued resistance seemed futile and surrender became the logical choice. Humans treated setbacks as temporary obstacles rather than permanent defeats. Dr. Stone's research teams made discoveries that revolutionized galactic science by combining human innovation with alien knowledge in ways that neither species had imagined possible. The hybrid technologies developed during the war proved to be just the beginning of what could be achieved when different civilizations worked together instead of conquering each other. The transformation of galactic civilization accelerated as former enemies became partners in building something greater than any single species could achieve alone. Human diplomatic principles based on equality and mutual respect replaced the imperial system of conquest and subjugation. The change was so fundamental that many aliens needed years to adjust to the new reality. Admiral Vexter eventually wrote the report that would be studied throughout galactic history as a lesson about the dangers of underestimating unknown enemies. His final analysis explained how the Empire had made every possible mistake when encountering humanity and had created the exact conditions needed to forge their own defeat. The Krillian Admiral's words became famous throughout the galaxy as the definitive explanation of how the mighty Zephyrian Empire had fallen to primitive humans. He wrote that they had measured human technology and found it wanting while never measuring human spirit. They had measured human physical capabilities and found them inferior while never measuring human adaptability. They had measured human civilization and found it primitive while never measuring human determination. The final sentence of Vexter's report captured the essence of the Empire's failure and became the motto of the new galactic civilization, but the time they understood what they were truly fighting, it was already too late to prevent their own destruction. The Empire had awakened something in humanity that transformed them from a single-planet species into the leaders of galactic civilization. The story concluded with scenes of human and alien children learning together in schools across hundreds of worlds as the new generation grew up without the prejudices and limitations that had led to war. The galaxy had learned that true strength came not from conquest or technological superiority, but from the ability to grow, adapt, and never surrender to seemingly impossible odds. President Carter's final address to the Galactic Assembly summarized humanity's contribution to galactic civilization with characteristic simplicity. She explained that humans had not conquered the galaxy, but had taught it something more valuable than victory. They had shown that any challenge could be overcome through determination, creativity, and the refusal to accept defeat as anything more than a temporary setback.